Americans all over are demanding a new sensibility, a new philosophy of government from Washington. Instead of sending spies to snoop on participants at Earth Day, I would welcome the efforts of concerned citizens of all ages to stop the abuse of our environment. Instead of watching a football game on television while young people beg for the attention of their president concerning our actions abroad, I would encourage them to speak out, organize for peaceful change, and vote in November. Instead of blocking efforts to control the huge amounts of money given political candidates by the rich and the powerful, I would provide certain limits on such amounts and encourage all the people of this nation to contribute small sums to the candidates of their choice. Instead of calculating the political costs of this or that policy and of weighing favors of this or that group, depending on whether that group voted for me in 1968, I would remind all Americans at this hour of the words of Abraham Lincoln: a house divided cannot stand.
Wise and powerful words there from the goddess Shirley Chisholm. 96 years ago, yesterday would make her birthday November 30th. So I wanted to begin the program with a shout out to Sister Shirley Chisholm. As you know, that was from her infamous historical announcement that she was seeking the Democratic nomination for president in January of 1972, the first Black woman to ever do so. And I will be honest, I have voted for Shirley Chisholm for president on at least a couple of past presidential election cycles. I wrote her name in. Y'all know what I did. Listen, hey, everybody, happy Tuesday. Welcome to Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Amazing show we have on deck for you today. Of course, we are going to be talking about the Biden cabinet picks, and it is aptly named, the title of today's show, Cabinet of the Living Dead, because the neoliberals have arisen from the grave that Trump stomped them under for the past 4 years, and now they are back with a vengeance. And if you don't believe me, look at the people that Joe Biden is nominating and appointing potentially to his cabinet, and even some of the names that are being floated are likely some of the most deplorable folks on the left. I don't even know if I would call these people leftists. They just happen to be Democrats. So we have a wonderful conversation in store for you today. So first, I want to remind everybody, don't forget, we're trying to get these subscribers up on the Burn It Down with Kim Brown YouTube channel. So at your convenience, I need you to head over there and hit subscribe. We cracked 400 subscribers in just a couple of short weeks, so I'm actually pretty happy about that. Thank you all so much. But we got to get to 1,000 because YouTube be acting like some hoes, and we need to unlock all of the features to our new channel. So we can only do that until we get to 1,000 subscribers. So do me that favor and go and do that. Also, thank you to everyone that's already in the chat and in the comments. We appreciate y'all watching. Thank you for watching us for this period of time and for the time prior to this when we were doing Stir Crazy. So we really appreciate the longtime people who have been rocking with us pretty much this whole 2020. But enough about that. Time to get into the program. And I'd like to introduce to you our wonderful panel, a duo dynamic, if I may say. Of course, we have a friend of the show here, Adriel Hampton. We always like to call on Adriel when it's time to talk some hardcore political policy and when we really want to make fun of Democrats. Adriel is the one to do that. Adriel is a political consultant. Adriel has been working in a variety of different roles, journalist, investigator, and he's big shit talker now on Twitter, just giving Gavin Newsom all that he can handle on the Twitter. So Adriel, as usual, we're happy to see you joining us today. And today we are also joined with Branko Marcetic. Branko is a staff writer at Jacobin magazine, but Branko also has a new forthcoming book out about Joe Biden called Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. Branko is joining us today from T-Dot, Toronto. It's one of my favorite places. Branko, thank you so much for making some time to join us here on the program. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
All righty. So I'm not even really sure where to start because, you know, when you look up and down the slate of either named persons to Joe Biden's forthcoming cabinet or people who are being speculated as to be named, you know, it reads like a who's who of dirty old Clintonites and tired ass, weak ass Obamaites. And it's not encouraging for people who were so excited to get rid of Donald Trump. And it's like, yay, we got rid of the fascists. But wait a second. Wait, what did we actually get? Adriel Hampton, what are we getting from this forthcoming Biden administration? We're going to get into some of the specifics of the cabinet picks in just a moment, but I wanted to get your overall take as to the impression that the Biden administration in their early days, what kind of impression are they making upon you at this time?
Well, it's not a particularly positive one. I actually had to go back to February, where there was the battle going on to ensure that Michael Bloomberg wasn't the Democratic nominee. And I think there were some of us, myself included, who thought, you know what, even if it's Biden, we have to stop Michael Bloomberg. And that even if it's Biden is coming home to roost, because we're seeing a cabinet that is the same kind of well-intentioned bureaucrats that continue to let global wars continue, global arms sales continue, and that don't really have the best interest of the little guy in mind. And I think that that's potentially dangerous, specifically because that is where Trump built his power, is on saying he was for the little guy. So you play right into the hands without having really any hint of populism. It's really bizarre, too, to see someone like Neera Tanden get in there and immediately change her Twitter bio. She's the head of Center for American Progress, from being a progressive to being a liberal. She literally changed her Twitter bio when she got picked to potentially head the office of the budget office for Biden.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get into Neera Tanden momentarily. Branko, I wanted to get your take on this, if I could. You know, so much excitement, again, as I mentioned, behind and urgency behind trying to get Trump out of office, even though he's not officially out until he actually leaves the White House. Donald Trump is still trying to move forward with some sort of hodgepodge of, you know, legal maneuvering, you know, possibly trying to influence the actual electors in the Electoral College when it comes time for them to cast their votes. Trump has still not conceded the race, which is, it's funny and sad in a way. But when we look at what Joe Biden is bringing to the table in terms of some of these cabinet picks, and how some are viewing these picks as being blatantly antagonistic to the left.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a divide during the primary between people who saw defeating Trump as one stage of a larger battle, and people who saw defeating Trump as kind of the be-all and end-all of everything. You know, that was the one thing that had to be done before everything could sort of be hunky-dory again. And I think right now we're seeing what a return to normal looks like, which is that we're getting, you know, a kind of mirror image of the Trump administration, kind of corporatists, people who are self-dealing, people who are very much, you know, outside of government, involved in some of the worst problems and crises that are you know, plaguing the US and the rest of the world, except a sort of slightly different brand. You know, maybe these people are a little more, they're friendly to Democrats, they're more liberal, perhaps in some of their personal views. But fundamentally, when it comes to structural issues around the economy and a whole bunch of other issues, there may not be that much of the daylight really between what we saw, you know, 4 years ago. And yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of these picks, I don't know if they're necessarily chosen to deliberately antagonize the left, but certainly it's a sign that the Biden administration is not going to be really incorporating any sort of left-wing perspectives into its governing. Not that really anyone expected it to. I think there were some people who were kind of claiming that no, Biden could be the next FDR. You know, he's learned the lessons of today, and he knows where he went wrong before. There were certainly people making that case, but I think a lot of people, they were always skeptical, and they saw getting rid of Trump and putting Biden in as a harm reduction effort. And now, you know, the battle continues to maybe block some of these appointments, or maybe even get some better ones in there.
Well, let's talk about harm reduction, if we could, for a moment, because Adriel referenced Neera Tanden, who up until recently was heading up the Center for American Progress, this center-left, perhaps, think tank, which has documented to receive, big money from big oil and big tech, and a lot of the Democrats' favorite donors also donate to the Center for American Progress. And there was a clip of Neera floating around. This is from 2010. This is a C-SPAN clip where she, as representative of the Center for American Progress, was talking about Social Security and Medicare cuts and why these so-called entitlements, it's not a bad thing to cut Social Security and Medicare. Let's hear from Neera Tanden, 2010, if we could.
There's a viewer here who wants you to take us deeper into entitlements by Twitter. Ms. Tanden, do you know what the president means when he says entitlements are on the table? Any specifics and anything you would endorse?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a range of entitlements that, I think when we're talking about entitlements, we're talking about Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. These are programs that people receive support because of the status that they have. So when after 65, you get funding from Social Security and Medicare. Actually, it's getting older for Social Security. But the president has $300 billion in his budget in cuts in Medicare. That comes on top of cuts in Medicare from the Affordable Care Act. So he has put specific cuts in the budget already in Medicare, and they had savings in Medicaid in the past. I think the question really is, if we're going to have a deal to address long-term deficit reduction, we need to put both entitlements on the table as well as taxes. It's unfair to ask only middle-class Americans to bear the burden of our deficits. Middle-class Americans actually didn't create the deficits. So I think the challenge is that we should have entitlements on the savings, on the entitlements, and the Center for American Progress has put forward ideas and proposals to reform the beneficiary structure of Social Security. Some of our progressive allies aren't as excited about that as we are, but we've put those ideas on the table. But we think that those are legitimate ideas that need to be put part of a proposal where everyone's at the table. We don't just ask middle-class Americans to sacrifice. We ask all Americans, and especially, I think it's not unreasonable to ask the wealthiest Americans to pay simply what they were paying in the Bush years.
Sure, that's not unreasonable. Is the Biden administration going to do that? Is the question. Adriel, I listen to that clip, and I understand it's a 10-year-old clip, but at the same time, being aware of the enormous deficits that the Trump administration was able to run up as a result of tax cuts and for the wealthy and other poorly directed ways for budgeting, the Democrats are immediately about to be bullied by Republicans to address the deficit. And it always comes on the backs of poor people, of working people, people who receive Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and food stamps, et cetera. Is this the direction that the Biden administration is heading towards, capitulating towards the right to Republicans and going along with cuts to the social safety net in the middle of a fucking pandemic?
Yeah, I think that the most frightening thing is the inability of the Biden administration, and this is true for the campaign as well, to stake out serious ground for what their goals are. The ugliest thing about that particular clip was the look, almost like a little smirk, when Neera Tanden was talking about progressive allies and their thoughts on Social Security. I think it's very clear that we have makings of an administration that thinks they know what they're doing, and they're running into the buzzsaw of a Republican Party that is all or nothing. It's tax cuts for the rich, nothing for the poor. And they're going in saying, we're going to negotiate, or everything's on the table. If they said that Neera Tanden's job at OMB was going to be passing a $15 minimum wage and making sure that was instituted throughout the country, perhaps we'd have something to look forward to. But right now, we're getting there's a critique of the Democratic Party that is the Republicans go in with an ideology, the Democrats go in with like it's a jobs program for well-educated people who are associated with think tanks, previous administrations, and use the revolving door of corporate consultancies. And that's very much what we're seeing. There's no clear policy agenda. So like, how can you say we're excited about this? And I think this, like going back to normal, it's almost like, the Republicans had playing cards for the generals during the Iraq War. You can see, 2021 or maybe already we have playing cards for these heroes of the Democratic Party. And it's all kind of a joke when tens of millions of Americans are facing eviction, going hungry, and suffering from a pandemic. Like, we need strategy, not just names, particularly names of folks who don't have a record.
Branko, a big concern from actual progressives and people on the left is that, Joe Biden's standing on his history and his resume of bipartisanship, being able to reach across the aisle, and he says that like with a straight face, which I think is hilarious, because, the Democrats are constantly open to working with Republicans, and Republicans are like, kindly get the fuck out of our face. We don't care to work with you. But when I hear, this take from Neera Tanden, 10 years old, whatever, she's in favor of cutting quote unquote entitlements, a term also which makes my skin crawl just a bit there. Is this what the kind of fight, or is it even going to be a fight? Is the Biden administration going to capitulate to the Republicans when they start taking the axe to the budget when it comes to Social Security and Medicare?
I think that is the real danger in appointees like Tanden and some of the other people that we've seen over the past few weeks. It's not even so much that they would necessarily do it on their own, because I think now the political winds have shifted within the Democratic Party enough that going out and saying you're going to cut Social Security and Medicare and a bunch of these other programs is a non-starter. It would be hugely unpopular with the base and unacceptable. But if it's engineered in a way where the Democrats can point to the Republicans, and they can point to the coronavirus crisis or any other crisis for that matter, whether it's a fiscal debt ceiling crisis as we had under Obama, or a bunch of other things. If they can point to that and say, well, the Republicans made us do it, we couldn't do this, we couldn't get these much needed funds out of here and fund these programs to deal with this without giving them something of what they wanted, I think they would happily do that. And as you say, Biden's history points to that. It's not just that he has willingly and often, worked on his own initiative to try and cut Social Security and Medicare and cut spending on a bunch of very vital government programs, including for public health, through the 90s. But also, he under Obama, as Obama's vice president, was kind of the point man to negotiate with Republicans, and particularly Mitch McConnell, who has a very high chance of being in charge of the Senate if these Georgia races, if they fall short for the party. And basically what Biden did during those times is, in order to get a deal, which is for Biden, the main thing, just to be able to say, I have a deal, I have an agreement. In order to do that, he cut deals that were often infuriating to even conservative Democrats like Dianne Feinstein, who they just thought he gave everything away. He got almost nothing in return. And it was so bad that in 2013, Harry Reid actually banned Biden from negotiating with Republicans because he said he was too much of a doormat. He would just give away everything. And so I think not just Biden at the head of it, but as you say, with Tanden and some of these other people, there is a real chance that the administration will just sort of say, well, you know what? It was either, not cutting Social Security or getting the money to deal with coronavirus. And we had to do what we had to do.
So Joe Biden addressed the media today where he made some announcements to his team, his incoming team at the White House. I want us to take a quick peek at what he had to say. Let's take a listen.
In the weeks since winning the election, Vice President Harris and I have covered meetings with a number of people. We convened meetings with labor leaders and CEOs at the same time, mayors and governors of both political parties. There's a consensus out there that as we battle the COVID-19 disease, we have to make sure that business and workers have the tools, resources, and guidance and the health and safety standards to be able to operate safely. The goal is simple: to keep businesses and schools open safely. And for millions of Americans who have lost their jobs or hours and have had to claim unemployment, we have to deliver them immediate relief. That includes affordable health care for millions of people who have lost it and are in danger of losing it, child care, sick leave, family leave, so workers don't have to choose between work and family, relief from rent and student loans. We need to support small businesses and entrepreneurs who form the backbone of the communities that we live in, that are teetering on the edge. There's an urgent need to fund state and cities so the frontline workers on those jobs can stay in the jobs. The founders are pretty smart. I could have gotten this lesson from the future Secretary of the Treasury. There's a reason why all the states and localities have to have a balanced budget, but we're allowed federally to run a deficit in order to deal with crises and emergencies as we have in the past. And we have to keep vital public services running. We have to give aid to local and state governments to make sure they can have law enforcement officers, firefighters, educators, as we did in the Recovery Act of 2009. And right now, the full Congress should come together and pass a robust package for relief.
They sure should. Are they gonna? No time soon. Probably not until at least those Georgia runoff elections in the Senate are decided. I don't see Congress coming together and getting anything passed because they have done absolutely jack shit since the first one. Adriel, there's a lot to unpack out of that short clip because Joe Biden said some things that I have some questions about. For example, when he talks about the goal is simple to keep schools and businesses open safely, I'm aghast at why the goal is not to save lives and to get a hold of this virus. There is not seeming to be a cohesive plan coming from the Biden administration about how to do that, but there's definite emphasis on making sure schools and businesses stay open. And then he also mentioned getting affordable health care to people who have lost their jobs. Well, if you lost your job, chances are you can't afford much. And for people out there watching this who I know have experienced the loss of at least one job in your lifetime, when they send you those COBRA papers, do you not laugh your ass off? Like, how do you think I'm about to afford $400, $500, $600 a month in COBRA premiums when I literally just lost my job? Joe Biden is already entering the presidency from a position of disconnectment from the people that probably voted overwhelmingly to make him president, and yet here he is 50 days out from inauguration. And what are the details, Mr. Biden? What are your thoughts, Adriel?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing you didn't hear him talk about is cash relief. And that's crazy because that actually puts him at odds with what the Trump administration supported, which was just an initial small payment directly to all Americans, or at least folks. I think that in Congress, they made sure it cut off, it was means tested. Before the show started, we were discussing a little bit about those of us who were, politically active during the Barack Obama administration remember very well things like climate change being addressed with a cap and trade tax scheme, and also a recovery from the financial crisis that made many banks whole without repercussion, while tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of families lost their homes in what many call the mortgage crisis. Here we are dealing with a pandemic that has us in even worse economic straits. And we're not talking about making individuals and families whole and safe, both in terms of healthcare and the ability to have a place to live. Many people are facing eviction because they haven't paid rent in months. And there's a federal moratorium that's about to expire. Many states and localities aren't even acting under that federal moratorium. You kind of have to know about it and tell your landlord about it, I think, in order to be really protected. I think that he needs to be a lot more bold. And if that means putting someone younger and more aggressive in there, it's like it took Kamala Harris to say that they were going to decriminalize marijuana. Biden won't talk about that, and his actual plans are much more, don't mention that. And so, one, give the people something to be excited about. Two, people actually are desperate for help right now, just desperate. And that speech, is not cutting it. The platitudes are not cutting it. And I think that, unfortunately, after his long career in the Senate, Joe Biden is pretty out of touch with everyday folks. And that's the problem with this kind of cabinet, where you're not seeing like people coming out of the NGO or nonprofit wing of the party. You're seeing these career bureaucrat folks who also make $500,000 as lobbyists and consultants when they're not in power, or when the Democratic Party is not in power. We definitely need something different.
Well, it doesn't seem like we're going to get that different thing, at least not out of the Biden administration. I mean, this is Obama 2.0, Clinton 3.0, possibly. Branko, when I hear Joe Biden talk about it's so important that, businesses and schools stay open as the pandemic is accelerating, as we are seeing record hospitalizations, record numbers of positive cases. Do you know what it sounded like to me? It almost sounded like when Donald Trump was on the stump talking about he's bringing back coal jobs. Like, sir, I hear you. That is extremely unlikely at this point in time. And here is Joe Biden again talking about we need to try to do what we can to keep schools and businesses open. Meanwhile, all the health experts saying that no, actually, we need to lock down is probably the most prudent way forward if we're going to get a handle on this horrible pandemic.
Yeah, it's very ironic given that Biden ran on, very little, but one of the few things that he did have in his platform was that he was going to be the president who listens to science and who, listens to scientists and doesn't just let ideology drive his response to things like coronavirus. And of course, now we're seeing a pretty major backing away from that. I mean, Biden has ruled out doing a national stay-at-home order. When one of his advisors on his panel, his coronavirus panel, said in an interview with Yahoo News, I believe, that the best thing to do would be to shut down for 4 to 6 weeks and give everyone cash payments and all the other sort of support they would need to be able to weather that time at home. Both Biden and 2 other advisors basically came out and said, no, that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. And that guy basically had to walk back what he had said. He said, well, I just said this in an interview. It does not necessarily mean that the Biden administration is going to do it. I think it's clearly because they're worried about the political fallout from a national stay-at-home order. But I think even more than that, it's the same concern that Trump and so many of the Republicans had, which is that they don't want to crash the economy. And of course, you wouldn't have to crash the economy if you were willing to, as Adriel said, spend the money to both get cash into people's pockets, to make sure that their healthcare was covered, to make sure they weren't being evicted, all these things. If you could do that, then you wouldn't have, the economy could stay afloat. You would go through a period of pain, and then things would hopefully rebound, albeit now without a pandemic surging throughout the country, killing hundreds of thousands. But it does not seem that Biden's going to do that. And I wonder, he may get lucky because a vaccine may come along and it may work and it may be widely used, and ultimately that may be what neutralizes the virus. But if a vaccine is not effective, or if there's any other problems with it, and Biden, really proceeds with this idea of trying to keep businesses open and schools open, and not fully, locking down, as every expert has been saying for months that the U.S. needs to do, you could have not just a protracted health crisis, but a protracted economic crisis, because the economy has never allowed basically that return to normalcy that Biden has been promising. And that could really hamstring his administration for the coming years, particularly with the midterms coming up in a couple of years.
Absolutely. I mean, whatever sense of normal that any of us had January of 2020, we have to let that shit go because America as we knew it is not coming back to that. And for the tens of millions of people who have lost their jobs in the hospitality industry, in the restaurant industry, my heart breaks for them. It honestly, truly does. But I feel as though our leaders, the current president and the forthcoming president, are extremely short-sighted about how dire the situation is, or if they do fully grasp it, they are not revealing that to us. Dwayne, I want us to pop up A1 for me if you could, because part of what has been talked about a lot about this Biden cabinet, this incoming administration, is the number of firsts. There's a lot of firsts coming onto the scene. So the first director of national intelligence, Adriel Hampton, that's a first time for a woman to do that. Wonderful. Dwayne, let me get T6, young sir, if I could. T6, Congresswoman Deb Haaland, in strong consideration to become the first ever Native American cabinet secretary to head up Department of Interior. This is a remarkable, something I honestly had no clue about, that here in the 21st century, in the year 2020, there has never been an Indigenous person to serve as part of a presidential cabinet, which is insane. But as you guys know, if you watch Burn It Down with Kim Brown, last week we had a panel talking about Black Native Americans, Black Indigenous people who are putting the press on Congresswoman Haaland to make the Biden administration honor the treaties of 1866, acknowledging the Black freedmen, and have them be incorporated into the tribes receiving of federal benefits, et cetera. So her nomination is also not without controversy. And so Adriel, smarter people than I have said this often, and let me just reiterate, it's nice to have a woman, a person of color, or a woman who is a person of color, or a Black woman, et cetera, in these positions for the first time. But representation is not enough if these people are still advocating for policies that keep Black people and people of color in marginalized communities, in a substandard state. I feel as though people are going to be attacking some of these potential nominees, and then the response is going to be like, oh, well, you're just racist, or you hate women, or you don't want people of color in these positions, or you don't want a woman to head this up. Why is that argument just not going to work this time around?
Well, I don't think I can say that it's not going to work, because they use it to batter progressives nonstop. And you can see that it very much works with the mainstream press to put someone in a position and say they're the first. I think that the position where there's a first that's probably taking the most heat right now is for Secretary of Defense and Michelle Flournoy, I believe. Folks are looking at the records of these picks and saying, look, they're working for defense contractors, or they're, complicit in the drone program. And the only thing that I can hope is that because people started paying more attention under Trump, they will actually be willing to pay more attention to things like the drone program, to things like family separation, and the private industry of imprisoning migrants, and just everybody, mostly people of color in our prison system. So the joke I think about is the we need more prison guards, more female prison guards, clap, clap, which is on social media a lot. And that's kind of what this administration looks like. It's like we need a woman sending the drones. There is a cartoon like that. It says, it's like people in Afghanistan, and they're like, did you hear that these drones are like from a woman? And they're like, oh my God, it's amazing to be part of this great progress. But the difficulty is we can't just, make the jokes and be cynical about it. We have to figure out a way, as the progressive left, as a socialist, as activists for peace, to actually overcome whether it's the picks themselves or the policies that they administer. And I'm not sure that we've figured out exactly how to do that. There's going to be a diversity of tactics. I know that Roots Action, which I work with, had one of the Branko was talking about the two-step approach, which is defeat Trump and then protest Biden. I'm concerned that protest isn't enough. I protested the Iraq War, and it was one of the largest protests at its time in the world. And it didn't have an impact. George W. Bush just kind of, blinked through it. And I feel like, Biden is riding on this 80 million votes. And those were votes against Trump, not for Biden. But he's pretending that they were votes for him. And I think, unfortunately, the progressives are going to have to work very, very hard to drive a wedge in the Democratic Party and sustain that in order to humanize this administration.
The Iraq War. Oh my God. You want to talk the second Iraq War. You want to talk about Generation X, heartbreak right there. Adriel, I was out there with the people, millions of us.
Yeah, that was really probably the sole event that radicalized me. And then the second one was the mortgage crisis, because in both instances, you saw a government that was totally unwilling to think about regular people, and it was hell-bent on taking care of the most powerful interests. In one case, defense contractors, and the second, Wall Street banks.
And Joe Biden was right there with his thumbs up for all that shit. Like, yep, sign me up. Me sign my name right to all this nonsense. Dwayne, let me look at T3 if we could for a moment. Adriel brings up a good point about, these are the professional class of folks. This is the political elites that are coming in to the Biden folks, to the Biden White House. And we talked about Ronald Klein, that's his chief of staff, if I have that correct. He's former venture capital executive, former pharmaceutical insurance lobbyist, and Steve Ricchetti, top Democrat recipient of Big Oil, Cedric Richmond, co-founder of the firm that represents Big Pharma and private equity, Joe Malley Dillon. And let's go to the next one, Dwayne, because this is the one I found. Well, first of all, I found all these pretty interesting, Ken Vogel. So thank you very much for putting this out. But co-founder of the firm that represents the big defense tech companies, Blinken, that is going to be the Secretary of State, I believe, and the ex-consultant for data mining for Plantier Tech, Avril Haines, who is going to be heading up D&I. Just basically a who's who of Washington insiders, people who have made their money in the private sector and are probably going to make more money once this Biden administration finally does come to a close. And, I encourage you guys to go check out Ken Vogel's timeline to just kind of get a quick primer on who these people are, where they came from, and now what they're going to be heading up. But there has been a little bit of pushback from some establishment Democrats on some certain policies. And I'm thinking about, first and foremostly, I think Liz Warren did an interview today where I saw on her timeline that she posted a video clip, but don't have the clip. But Dwayne, I'm sorry, and I can't recall thank you very much, sir. Liz Warren, guns out, saying off the top, student loan debt hurts struggling families. But the Federal Reserve Chair Powell confirmed to me today that cancel student debt is the single most effective economic stimulus available to President-elect Biden on day one. Branko, shots fired. Liz Warren said, you're not going to put me in your little funky cabinet? Cool. Guess what? I'm going to start pushing you to cancel student debt from the executive office right away, even before you are inaugurated. How do you take what Liz Warren had to say today about that specific issue?
I haven't seen that interview, so I'm not sure exactly what she said, but I think Warren's plan during the primaries was definitely more bold than Biden's. It wasn't quite the full student debt cancellation that Sanders had been pushing for, but, you know, it would certainly be better than what Biden is proposing now, which I believe is a $10,000 cancellation that's means tested. So very limited in terms of who it's going to, and even when it goes to those people, it only makes a relatively small dent in what they are. I mean, I agree that it would be a really important stimulus. I mean, if you have people who are spending more than money to buy things, food, go to restaurants, consumer products, that kind of thing, instead of being having to sink it in debt payments and worse interest on that debt, then yes, that's definitely much better in the economy. And hopefully Biden will listen to this as a common sense measure. It's something that he can easily do without having to go through Mitch McConnell. But I also think this has to be a floor. It cannot be the limit of what Biden does to kind of point to and say, well, you got what you wanted. I did the thing that you asked me for, and now you guys can just be quiet and support me and vote in 2010, even whatever I do in between and now and that date. So I think student loan cancellation, it's a no-brainer. It's a good place to start, but it has to be so much broader. I mean, the fact that Biden's sole plan, or part of his plan for healthcare is just to give people subsidies to keep their health insurance, for instance. That's not good enough. I mean, Biden even ran on a public option, and it feels that the Democrats, they've certainly said this anonymously to news outlets, that they're kind of backing away from that plan. And people have to make it clear that this is not good enough. Canceling student debt, great, but it's just one thing, and there's so many problems facing people right now that this demands a much broader, much more bolder response than just that.
Adriel, are we going to see this starting next year when the new Congress is sworn in? I mean, we are already starting to see members of the squad speak up loudly about passage of the Green New Deal, for example. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But getting back to, Senator Warren sort of laying it right there on the table, saying that, hey, the Fed chair is saying that this could be an instant economic stimulus and it can be done from the executive office. Is Joe Biden gonna hear Elizabeth Warren on this issue, in your opinion?
Well, I think the challenge is that he's already minimizing how much he can do or is willing to do, and it's the problematic thing is that your policies need to be popular, and they need to move Congress to act. They need to move the opinion of the American public, and I think that we will see student debt relief. The two areas where I'm actually most hopeful, I actually went and looked at Neera Tanden's background to see where she was on $15 minimum wage, and she started supporting it at least in 2017, if not earlier. Now, the problem is, as Branko says, is that you can't, for example, raise the minimum wage to $15 and say that we're done, because that fight's been going on for several years to get to 15, and it's worth less than it was. Like, we need 20. And so do we get a minimum wage proposal and package that's heavily backed by the administration that is indexed and that makes sure workers continue to get raises, or do we just get something that catches us up to 2012, and then workers are still having to fight for basic costs of living when they work full-time jobs? Student debt relief, could we see $50,000 in student debt relief? That's what I've seen as the limits of the executive order capability, and that would make a huge difference for a lot of people. It would be a huge stimulus. So in those two areas, I am hopeful. I think where we really need to watch out is things like a social safety net, which needs to be expanded. The $15 minimum wage would be helpful, but it doesn't take care of folks' health care. You can't get good health care on $15 an hour in this country. And we also need college to be free, not just this one-time debt relief for current students. So there's an awful long way to go. And I was just thinking also about the Ken Vogel tweets that you showed, and I think it's significant to talk about where someone has been, but it's really what's important is what do they believe? And I think for most of these people, they don't have beliefs that are the kind of transformative change that we need, both for the America that we have, and then the America that we're experiencing coming out of the pandemic next year, hopefully. And because you could think there are people who are investment bankers or VCs or worked for some kind of unattractive private sector or for an unpopular politician who have great vision, who are fighting. I mean, I think even during the primaries, think about someone like Tom Steyer. If he'd said that Tom Steyer and not John Kerry was going to be his go-to green guy for climate change, I think people would be a lot happier. Despite concerns about Tom Steyer's background, that Tom Steyer is on the front lines, putting down money, putting down his personal capital to move this issue forward. And that's what we don't see from these folks. Even with Tanden and the $15 minimum wage, it's piggybacking on a popular policy that's already been fought for by grassroots activists and labor.
Oh, Adriel, you have divine timing. Dwayne, can we get to T2, my brother, before we get to that video? Let's get to T2, because you talk about John Kerry, former Secretary of State and former Senator. Jeffrey St. Clair tweeted from Counterpunch that in his memoir, President Obama describes John Kerry, now Biden's climate czar, as working assiduously to convince Greens to, quote, offer up some concessions on subsidies for nuclear power and the opening of additional U.S. coastlines to offshore oil drilling. Obama says this with admiration and gratitude. And, climate people lost their shit. Shout out to Steve Horn. He's our climate reporter here, bureau chief at The Real News. If you go to Steve Horn's timeline, he lays it out as to why John Kerry is not an appropriate pick for climate czar. And some of the members of the squad a couple of weeks ago participated in Washington, D.C. at a Sunrise Movement event where they got up and spoke very loudly in support and of defense of the Green New Deal, which the Biden-Harris administration has already said in advance that they do not support. Let's hear from incoming freshman Congressman Jamal Bowman from New York City.
Latino communities were excluded. Indigenous communities were excluded. Joe Biden has pledged a $2 trillion investment in environmental justice. And 40% of that has been pledged to districts like mine across the country. So that 40% has to be a part of a Green New Deal that rebuilds Black and brown communities across this country. In parts of my district, we have pockets where the poverty rate is as high as 30%. We need jobs, we need infrastructure, and we need those jobs to go to Black and brown communities. Black and brown communities organize across the country to make sure Joe Biden won the White House. And he did that. But now it's time for payback. And now it's time to make sure that we invest the resources necessary to rebuild our nation in a way that is representative of all of us, so we can truly have the people's house.
Branko, I continually, am impressed with Jamal Bowen, his oratory skills and his very much one of the his folksy mannerism. It appeals to me very much. I can't wait to see what he does once he actually gets into Congress. But to get back to his point, he and the more progressive members of the House are in 100% support of the Green New Deal, as are a large number of Americans when they are polled about it. But the Biden administration is staunchly against it and claims to have their own plan that does not go nearly as far as the Green New Deal, which a lot of climate activists would say the Green New Deal doesn't even go as far as it needs to go. Given that we have had such a tumultuous climate year, the pandemic notwithstanding, the amount of hurricanes that made landfall here in the U.S., the amount of flooding and other climate disasters, the wildfires out in California. Adriel can speak to that directly. I mean, the Biden administration, like previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, don't seem to have a comprehensive climate plan. How much longer can the country continue to go forth without leadership on the climate issue coming out of Washington?
Yeah, not just the country, but the world. I mean, it's crazy to think, but earlier this year, I was back home in New Zealand, and there were the apocalyptic fires in Australia, and the smoke was so vast and it billowed, across the Tasman onto New Zealand that the air in New Zealand was turned a sepia tone, like an old Civil War photograph. And then I was in California when the fires, just a few months back, were up, and we had to evacuate cats and a whole bunch of dog and a whole bunch of other belongings to get them out of harm's way just in case. So it's this stuff is getting the land around which we can sort of stand safely and say, well, it's happening over there, it's not affecting us. It's getting smaller and smaller by the year. Of course, you had hurricanes, as you mentioned as well. There was a land hurricane that hit Iowa as well. So it's a big question. I think that is one of the big challenges for Biden in his attempt to produce this return to normality, which I think I think you guys and many people always thought that was kind of a ridiculous line because things were never really that good when they were normal. But it's a big question whether things ever can get back to normal. And I think people are going to start realizing that because as these things intensify, there's going to be more of a push. And I think even among Republicans, there's going to be more of a push to actually do something, to act in a way to prevent climate change, or at least to prevent it from becoming even more catastrophic. The sad thing is, as it is, I can point you to Biden's promises in his platform that were concessions that groups like Sunrise Movement and the Sanders campaign managed to get out of him, and those are good concessions. But the problem is, you look at the people who are actually running the administration. That is really what defines what's going to be done on all these issues. And you have people like Ernest Moniz, the Obama's Secretary of Energy, who looks to be appointed by Biden. He's on the board of Southern Company, which is a coal and oil company. You've got Brian Deese from BlackRock, who's been appointed to be basically Biden's top White House economic advisor. And BlackRock is one of the firms that it's a financial firm that is one of the biggest drivers of the deforestation in the Amazon, which is reaching a critical point, and could well be a tipping point if it gets to that level, where it sends us on a course that we can't really go back from in terms of climate and ecological collapse. He's now advising Biden. Michelle Flournoy, who we mentioned before, who's probably going to be the defense secretary. One of the things that she advocated a few years back in op-eds in the Washington Post and elsewhere is that the U.S. to sort of reclaim its strategic, power in the world and economic power was to exploit its fossil fuel reserves, to export more oil, export more natural gas, exploit all the fossil fuel resources that are in the United States, which is obviously completely contrary to the kind of promises that Biden and the Democrats more broadly have made. And so that is a real concern, is that, yes, Biden has promised some things that are not nearly enough, but even those promises, may not be worth much if these are the people that are running his administration, and if it ends up that he has to make deals with Republicans who, of course, are going to be very hostile to any movement on renewable energy. So, this is why I wish people would stop taking, have a sigh of relief that Trump is gone, but get ready to resist Biden in the same way that you wanted to resist Trump when he was in power.
Say that again. Yes, please, people. We have to go as hard, if not harder, at Joe Biden than we went at Trump, because Biden possibly can be moved. Trump, it was not going to be moved on much. And it's so, disappointing just in a larger sense, because I'm thinking about, the type of selections that Joe Biden is making for his cabinet, because he's obviously considering Senate confirmations, right? People that can get confirmed by the Republican-controlled Senate, at least on this date. And to me, that again is such an early capitulation and concession, something that Republicans don't think twice about, Adriel. Like, Republicans don't even give a whole lot of consideration, at least not outwardly. The same sort of, agony that Democrats have, oh, can this person get confirmed? No, Republicans put who the fuck they want up there and tell Democrats to eat it. And the Democrats don't go as hard. And consequently, that's part of the reason why the left gets the results that we do out of elections.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue with that point, because I think that's one of our key problems. In fact, the thing that you see very clearly is that they even put their craziest people up in the primaries, and if they win, they stick right with them, stand right behind them. We have now, QAnon adherents, believers coming to Congress from the Republican Party. So, and they've been doing this. The Tea Party was probably my first real understanding of that, and that's a decade ago. And instead, we have our folks on the Democratic side kind of attacking the more radical and more visionary members of their caucus. I think, how do we get to the next stage? Because the notable thing, other than 80 million votes for Biden, was that the House Democrats didn't defeat a single Republican incumbent. And that's nuts, because, as we know, all the seats are up. So there are more than 200 Republican incumbents, and the DCCC couldn't beat any of them. And so I think it's clear that a bolder, more aggressive vision is needed, and we just have to we probably have to develop leaders that are not Joe Biden to get that done. Whether that's AOC, whether it's the squad as a whole, whether it's other emerging leaders, but we can't have any truck with these folks who would compromise with the establishment to try to get a seat at the table. And that's unfortunate, because we have people who I think are good intentioned and some who have good policies. I'm not going to name names. I think everyone could think of a few right away who routinely capitulate with the establishment and support what the establishment is doing. This time, we now have people running for the DCCC who say that they're going to lift the ban that the DCCC had put on consultants who work with progressive challengers to Democratic incumbents in primaries. And that, I'm on that ban list technically. And will that be enough? Not really. We need a lot of leadership. We need coalitions, and we need centers of power for progressive politics that don't rely on the good graces of the Biden administration, and these picks. I think the good thing about these picks is they just make it really clear that we're not going to get what we want. We're going to have to do it. As Branko, you just said, we are going to have to fight, or Kim, you said we're going to have to fight just, harder even than we did with Trump, because this time they have the guise of being the good guys, the guise of being the people that want to return to normal when you can't return to normal when the world has changed.
Hold on, Adriel, back up. Are you blacklisted by the DCCC? Is that what I just heard you say?
Yeah. So for a couple of years, at least, the DCCC has a policy of not doing any work with consultants who run primary challenges. And I've launched 2 of the primary challenges against Pelosi. So I'm super persona non grata. Not that I would have got that business anyway, in my case, but there are others who are legit, they want to work. For example, a lot of the progressive insurgents are women, are people of color. And then the consultants who work with them to try to help them knock out, in some cases, it's literally anti-abortion Democrats are incumbents, and then progressive challenger runs, and that consultant gets the cold shoulder from the official committee that spends the biggest money to advance Democrats. And this time they did not win. It's a miserable failure by the DCCC in 2020 when Biden had all of these votes. and then their candidates really trailed that and couldn't beat Republicans. And that's why this Georgia Senate thing is scary, is just because we're seeing that the anti-Trump vote is not necessarily a pro-Democrat vote.
Yeah, buddy, that's going to be an interesting one to watch in Georgia to see how that ends up shaking out. Gentlemen, we have reached the hour. So I will set you all free to go and do what it is that you're doing. Hey, I appreciate you making some time for us. We've been joined today with Branko Marcetic. Branko writes for Jacobin magazine. Check out his new book. It's titled Yesterday's Man. Branko, we're going to have you back on to sort of get into, we love stomping on Joe Biden around these parts. Joe Biden, Obama, all the establishment Democrats, they can catch all these elbows and feet and all that. So I want to have you back to sort of to talk about your book and explore Joe Biden's long career as a staunch neoliberal who liked to backslap white supremacists and former Klans people while he was in Congress. I'd be super interested to hear that. It's called Yesterday's Man, the case against Joe Biden. Branko has joined us today. And of course, special thanks to Adriel Hampton, blacklisted political consultant from the DCCC, but you should wear that as a badge of honor because they suck and you do not. So Adriel Hampton and Branko, thank you both so much for making some time today.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thanks.
Hey guys, listen, Jean-Viev, our wonderful producer, was dropping loads of comments. So let me get to a few of these comments, children. Hold on. Fuck DSS says the government is nothing but a loosely organized group of pyramid schemes. Find the lie. I find no disagreement with that statement. Sizzy M. Borska says, put the defense budget on the table. Yes, put it right there on the table. Man, that is our whole pandemic budget right there, is right there with the Pentagon. We could pay people to stay home. We could provide ample testing. We could give businesses the amount of money that they need in order to survive this shutdown, all that. Skeptical Mantis says Biden is not capitulating to the right by pushing austerity. He's doing what he wants to get done. Say that. That is exactly what he wants to do. You're right about that, because Democrats are fully capable of putting austerity measures on the table by themselves without the urging of Republicans. Carne Verde says Biden has always been a deficit hawk. Man, listen. If these people try to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare during the pandemic, man, we're going to have to show up at the White House with pitchforks and torches. Who else is on here? Got something to say. Clifford Maxwell says, we need Medicare for all and a UBI right now, but our so-called leaders are completely corrupt and out of touch with the will of the voters. Absolutely. And last one, let me give a shout out to the homie. Where you at, Holmes? Schultze 100. Schultze has been riding with us from the jump. Schultze is appreciating the Tina Turner I got in the background. Thank you, Schultze, for noticing. And Jill Farley with the last comment says, Biden has been a warmonger, written most of the bills that push for war. Oh boy, Trump is gone. But what happens if our new president should totally lose it? Oh shit. What will the country do with a cop? Oh shit. I don't know. I'm not looking forward to President Harris. And if that puts me at odds with my demographic of Black women, then so be it. Because as far as I'm concerned, Kamala is the police. And I don't root for the police. I don't care if the police is Black with breasts. I still do not root for the police. So interesting point. Thank you so much, Jill. Hey, gang, that's the show. Appreciate you sticking around and joining us today. We will be back on Friday for another episode of Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Please don't forget to go to the Burn It Down with Kim Brown YouTube channel and subscribe and keep subscribing. We appreciate all y'all's time and comments and all that. So we'll see you on Friday. See you later. Bye.